Species.
I've held back on talking about chain restaurants for a while, but I can't hold back any longer. What has happened to Wendy's?
Welcome to Origin of Species. My name is Scott. I'm here along with my friend Steve. And what has happened to Wendy's? It's gone downhill.
So
let's
Wendy's,
put it that way.
I think we alluded to this one time.
We did, yeah.
Years ago, Wendy's was kind of I'd say of the burger restaurants, like the high standard.
I would agree.
Like you knew with McDonald's is McDonald's. You get what you get with it. And I mean, I like McDonald's when I travel because McDonald's is the same everywhere. And generally, I know the low quality of service I'm going to get, but the food's going to taste the same. Burger King, I think I only go to when we're for our camping trip.
Right.
That just we do every few years.
Just to go ahead and get the diarrhea started.
Yeah. Get that out of the way. But Wendy's was always kind of like the gold standard.
Yep.
And they were someone that had their life together at one point. They were kind of like the person from high school who's going to do well with their life.
Right.
And it really, they peaked in high school.
Yeah.
Now, it's different, I think, than we've talked about some other chain restaurants that were the, attractive girls in high school that didn't maybe develop their characters.
Oh, this is like the jock that gets fat and starts drinking, that guy.
Something like that. Or maybe they got to a point that they just said, okay, we're just kind of going to stick with this, and we're going to invest in our Twitter account.
Yeah. Okay, I've got thoughts. First of all, let's hit the Twitter thing. Mm-hmm. It's funny, but look, does it make your hamburgers better?
No. And I'm frankly ashamed that I even know I have to refer to something on Twitter. I blame, by the way, if you're wondering who handles the social media here, no, I take that back. I do it. You do. But we have to take turns.
We do. We trade off. This gives me the opportunity. I've got lots of things to say. This gives me the opportunity to talk about a theme that's come up a few times on the podcast, which is, how you say things to people and you're not trying to be offensive, but you start with like no offense, mm-hmm. and they're going to get offended. And you said something to me one time. You're not trying to say something offensive.
Yeah.
But you should have said no offense. So I was ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
You went on a rant for about 10 minutes about just how awful Twitter was, how it was the worst dregs of humanity. Mm-hmm. It should all get burned to the ground. But it's like a necessary evil. Mm-hmm. But basically f*** Twitter. Mm-hmm. And then you said, you have a great personality for Twitter. Immediately after that, and you didn't realize what, and I was like, thanks. Well, you did just say it's the worst place where people congregate.
And what I meant by that, which is honestly true, was I knew you could dip your toe in there and get out unscathed.
But I didn't though. So I did used to do the Twitter, and again I call it the Twitter, but I called Steve, and you could tell I was actually upset, and I just said, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I need a break. I can't see everyone's horrific opinion all the time.
Yeah. And over exposure of personal information.
Oh my gosh. It's the water country of social media. You see tattoos you don't want to see. You see people's horrible opinions.
Yeah, it is that, and you probably get hepatitis. I probably have it now.
You have it now. Your computer certainly has it.
Hepatitis T.
That sounds like the worst drink ever. Yeah. But what I wanted to go back to with Wendy's and say, I'll tell you exactly what happened to Wendy's. They stopped doing it Dave's way. Dave Thomas, when he was alive, that place was run like a tight ship. Dave was everywhere. He was on the commercials. I'm sure he would just spot check Wendy's.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding.
No,
Dave kicked the bucket. 6 months later, they got downgraded. So now if you have to rank the fast food, again, I don't ever have Burger King. I'm going to put that. Do you put Burger King still though below Wendy's, or has Wendy's?
I don't think they've gone that.
I don't think so.
I think the thing with
McDonald's
Wendy's
has surpassed them, in my opinion.
Well, McDonald's has started doing, which I think is brilliant, is they address their worst problem, which I think is interacting with the people there. And if you go,
you
can have the touch screens. Yep. And I've been to a couple like space age McDonald's along the interstate.
I have too. Yeah, on the way to Williamsburg. We may have been on the same one. And it was, you don't have to deal with the people. And so it's like, look, you can either be Chick-fil-A and have the best people in the world, or you can be Wendy's, have awful staff, or you can be McDonald's and just be neutral with the kiosks.
Yeah.
And so that by default, that's better. Or you can go to Burger King and get diarrhea. But yet we keep coming back.
Yeah, not too much. So I think we all agree the gold standard is Chick-fil-A.
Yes. At least on the East Coast, I know West Coast has
I've been to some northern Chick-fil-A's, which is odd because it's just not. There's something about it north of Mason-Dixon line's not the same. But that's kind of a rare interaction for me to have. But Wendy's tonight, should have been. I was the second person in line. Added another 25 minutes, and I ordered a Coke Zero. I looked at the receipt. Coke Zero. I got my drink. Is Diet Coke. That's just, it's not right.
If you like Diet Coke, you need to take a long look in the mirror.
Easy. Bill, you know who loves...
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's not me. Not anyone I'm related to.
Oh, good.
Someone I've learned to gain a lot of respect for lately. Bill Gates loves some Diet Coke.
Okay.
My wife has been into his show on Netflix.
I started that as well.
And has I have a renewed respect for him too.
Yeah, he's great.
With that, but someone had asked my wife, does you think anyone goes up to him to ask him about all the Diet Coke he drinks? Because he's like apparently like pounding it all the time. And that's the guy's vice.
That's his vice, right.
He can probably buy somebody to harvest their organs.
Of course. Yeah.
Easily. Several. He's probably got several. He's probably in a body like number 4. Maybe that's why he wears like the casual clothes to distract from the fact that he's got, the harvested organs or body of a 19-year-old boy.
Probably so.
Yeah, but back to Wendy's.
Yes. So you got the Diet Coke instead of the Coke Zero,
and that was
which is a huge disappointment. Plus, I saw what you walked in with, and it was, well, you know how now you're like, I'll take a small, and it comes out and it looks like, a 2 liter. Mm-hmm. But you had a very large Diet Coke that you didn't drink because it was full because it was Diet Coke. So did anything else bad happen, or is overall?
I feel like that I was in a spot that the only close place to go was Wendy's, which is like the only Wendy's on my side of town, because I don't think they're putting them up anymore. I don't know what Wendy's has to do. They need to have some sort of revival. Take the energy they're putting in their Twitter account, making smart mouth comments to McDonald's, and figure out how to teach your employees the difference between Coke Zero and Diet Coke.
Yeah,
very important.
I think it's funny too, talking to my kid about, and this maybe I'm telling on myself a little bit here with the fact that we will occasionally need to go buy fast food. You're on the way to a baseball game or whatever, and he's like talking about, well, if you go to Wendy's, they're gonna get something wrong. Like if you go to Chick-fil-A, they're never going to get anything wrong. I don't think I've ever had anything wrong. And if you went in and you said, hey, I ordered this and I didn't get this, that they would, they would like start rending their garments or something. But okay, we're gonna get into the idioms for tonight, which are, the theme is names, and we've done ones with names before. But the first one tonight is, I think, an interesting one. In Like Flynn.
In Like Flynn.
So let's start. I want to talk about what it means and what it can mean, but and then we'll talk about where it comes from. So, but I'll go ahead and kick it over to you. What is it like? What does that mean to you? What do you think of? What's your history with this one?
Sure. In Like Flynn is one that I feel like I use sparingly. I have some other associations with it I'll get into in a second, but like I've used every now and then. It means that you're in a good spot, you're taken care of, you're in Like Flynn. Like, I need to get this done. I need to get inside this place. Oh, I got a guy that's going to take care of me. I'm taken care of. I'm in a good spot. Everything's
Bob's your uncle.
Bob, yeah. There's other ones like it that'll pop up that I'll remember at inappropriate moments during this recording.
Just shout it out.
But yeah, I'll just shout things for no
Tourette's
reason.
Style.
But one of my favorite uses of that was actually a pun on it. It was a 60s movie series that started with one called Our Man Flint, and then the sequel was In Like Flint. And it was a James Coburn spoof of James Bond. He played a secret agent named Derek Flint, which I remember liking a lot. And I remember also when Austin Powers came out, they ripped some stuff directly from it.
Okay, so I remember these movies.
Mm-hmm.
Never saw them. I remember it was James Coburn, but I didn't know it was a spoof. I thought it was just another spy type of thing. So they were making fun of Bond.
Yeah, and kind of doing their version of that.
Mm-hmm.
And James Coburn's an interesting guy. He has always one of those faces.
He does.
That it was a very distinct face.
Yes, you're so right.
And
yes.
it's hard to explain. It was this weird combination of rugged and handsome and very unattractive. He just had a very interesting face.
It's interesting. It's very kind of angular, but like it's
it was sharp.
Yes.
There was just something about him.
And I think to the name, James Coburn, it's just something about the name and the face. It's, I can't say it's good or bad. It's sort of like that Kramer painting. It's like, what does he say? It's hideous, yet I can't look away. I'm not saying he's hideous. It's just one of those things that strikes you.
He has an interesting look to him. So I remember I enjoyed those movies a lot. I remember when Austin Powers came out, I think the phone sound that's made when Austin Powers there's a very distinct phone ring is from that movie.
Right. So do you think it's a tribute or a ripoff? Probably a tribute, right?
I'd say it's a tribute because he was kind of, I was revisiting the plots of these movies, which are kind of think generic James Bond sort of things.
Right.
But there was one where I think the Agent Flint put himself into suspended animation. Which is how Austin Powers
that's right,
begins. So in Like Flynn, when I hear that, it means Bob's your uncle, you're taken care of, you're in a good spot.
When you were growing up, did you know it was in Like Flynn? Did you think it was in Like Flint?
I probably
just
thought
never
it was.
Think about it.
I bet you I said in Like Flint because of the movie, which I saw at an early age.
I remember hearing it and not being sure if it was Flint. I knew it wasn't Flint because I'd heard people say Flynn, but then I also heard Flint. But then I remember at some point thinking people were saying phlegm, like in like phlegm. Mm-hmm. So I was like, because you want to know what does that mean in like,
right?
Is it phlegm or Flynn or Flint? But you did know that it meant something good. You had it made,
right,
or whatever. The definition, I think from Wikipedia, just says to be easily or quickly successful.
Mm-hmm.
But then a lot of places I found, I never had thought of this, said to be quickly and or emphatically successful, usually in a sexual or romantic context.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never heard that. I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Had you?
No.
I guess we were just at home, reading our Bibles because I would have never thought that. So it definitely is in Like Flynn, Flynn. So then you go, well, what's Flynn? I think of Errol Flynn. So do you remember Errol Flynn?
Yeah, Errol Flynn
is
the actor that played Robin Hood. He
did. Yes,
I think of the word swashbuckling.
Yes.
So I remember he played Robin Hood and a couple other roles that were very similar, but he had a very swashbuckling.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, it is a word. I was going to say
it is a word.
He was kind of a dapper. I don't know. In my mind, he's always kind of like Robin Hood. Like I can see him as a suave. He's a guy that had a good time.
I think of you nailed it. And I actually have written down here. I've got some bullets that I'm looking at, and he was famous as being a romantic swashbuckler, and I think that's what you just said in his Hollywood films. But also, he had a very flamboyant private life.
Mm-hmm.
He actually titled his autobiography "My Wicked, Wicked Ways."
Mm-hmm.
So he was a guy that relished in it. He was swashbuckling on film. He played like fighter pilots, and he was a lover in real life. He was also rumored to have a big penis, and he did nothing to dispel those rumors.
Yeah,
but why would you?
Exactly.
Can you imagine? I
can't imagine that. I can think of there's rumors about me, and I can take one off the list that's out there.
It kind of reminds me of not to do with penis size, but it reminds me of I think it was not Michael Avenatti. Who's Trump's old lawyer? Oh gosh, the guy that's in jail now, his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Cohen started it, to bring it back to how awful Twitter is.
Mm-hmm.
He paid people to start like a Michael Cohen is sexy Twitter thing. And these paid people would go on and talk about how sexy he was. And like he basically, first of all, you could have done it yourself. Anybody can make a multiple Twitter account, as we well know.
Yeah.
But starting rumors about, Michael Cohen, he's sexy. He's quite a lover.
Yeah.
Well, in this sense, I don't think Errol Flynn had a Twitter, but these rumors were out there.
And I also think Errol Flynn didn't think he was going to end up in prison. I think that would be things I start to regret.
It's funny you say that because Errol Flynn was acquitted in February 1943 for the statutory rape of teenage girls. So two teenage girls. So he was acquitted, but still, it's not something you want to have on your. Right. I hate to bring it up, but unfortunately, that was a huge. I mean, that was like OJ before OJ. Maybe I don't know. That
should be a thing to be.
Yeah. So right, but it was, as you can imagine, a very high profile case. He was acquitted. We won't get into the details of that, but keep that in mind. So that was in 1943. Errol Flynn. By the way, there is a movie called In Like Flynn that was made like 3 years ago about the life of Errol Flynn, which I haven't seen. But
yeah. So In Like Flynn is based on him, and is that just around?
Well, no, not. It seems so, right? But let's keep going.
Okay.
If it was just that, I wouldn't bring this to the party. So let's start with in. Why would it be in Like Flynn? Why would you say that? Well, the word in has been used with regard to success, good fortune, or sexual conquest for years prior to Errol Flynn. So you go all the way back to 1854. John Mills had, I don't know if it's a book or a periodical, but it was called Life Racehorse. So freaking racehorsing is back.
Yeah.
Because it's always here. And he had a quote, he recounts the horse getting a good position in the race. And he says, and again, this is 1854. He says, the owner says, he's well in, very well in. And you can see how in means something good there. And it would be like in Like Flynn. And then in 1901, Alfred Mason had a novel, Clementina, where he said his luck for the moment was altogether in. Which, by the way, back in the day, a lot of novels, like some of the best novels were just like the name of a woman, There's Anna Karenina, Clementina, Pamela, which came way before. But so, and also there was a book called The 20s by E. Wilson, and he wrote, well, did Mr. Wilson get it in tonight? And that's kind of where you get the sexual part.
Yeah.
So getting it in, it means what you think it means.
It's a good double entendre. You can kind of say that with a knowing wink or emphasis on the word, and say that in front of people who, if you didn't want them to get the meaning.
Exactly. So
over their head.
So in has been, the reason I bring up those quotes is just to say in was used as something good, success, sexual conquest.
Yeah.
It's like we would say get lucky. Did you get it in? Gosh, now that we've said it, it sounds real dirty, but and it is actually.
But back to In Like Flynn, it's
Errol
smooth,
Flynn, gets it in, and there you have it, right?
Often.
Well, we're done,
or are we?
So most reference books, universally have accepted the fact that In Like Flynn was coined after Errol Flynn was acquitted in 1943. They're saying kind of like, he's good to go. He's Flynn. It's good. He's a successful guy that gets it in. And that seems to be supported by the first examples we have recorded. So in American Speech in December of 1946, they cited a 1945 use of In Like Flynn to mean something to be done easily. And in a Utah newspaper called the Orem Geneva Times in February 1946, they said, flying in a P-47 aircraft is really luxurious. As the GIs say, we're in like Flynn. So let's go back to the timeline. Errol Flynn, huge, famous actor, acquitted of, I don't want to say it again, acquitted. Right after that, we have these uses of in like Flynn to mean what it means now. So that pretty much should wrap it up, but not so fast.
Twist.
This is from Michael Quinion.
Okay.
Who we love.
Yes, and revere.
And we're about to experience something amazing.
Okay.
And I just want you to sit back and let it wash over you.
Listen, after going to Wendy's tonight, I need something like this to make me feel better. So please go ahead.
So I'm looking up Michael Quinion. I always look up worldwide words.
Mm-hmm.
I pull from everywhere, but I think you hopefully do the same thing because I want to see what Michael Quinion has to say. And I was delighted when I started reading what he said, which he said the trouble with the explanation is that there were examples that were of related expressions that came well before Flynn's trial. Mm. Mary Mopik of the American Dialect Society found an example from 1940. As well as this is from the sports section of the San Francisco Examiner in 1942. And it says, answering these questions correctly, and your name is Flynn, meaning you're in, provided you have 2 left feet and the written consent of your parents. And then there's a newspaper reference from 1943 where the phrase could be shortened to, I'm Flynn, meaning I'm in. Mm-hmm. This had nothing to do with Errol Flynn. These were not used in context of Errol Flynn. This was before his trial. This was before he had really blown up. But what's so amazing is the fact that just randomly, I'd already chosen this one, pulled it up, and we got Michael Quinion quoting Mary Mopik. Right. So it's like...
It is it, and that's like Guy Fieri.
I was going to say the only thing...
Discussing William Shakespeare.
Yeah, the only thing that could be better is if Michael Quinion was quoting Mary Mopik, saying a quote of Guy Fieri, which if that ever happens, my head's going to explode.
Yeah. And at this point, I'm starting to get concerned of our friend... Mr. Mary Mopik starts looking at restraining orders because he's coming up a little bit too much.
How did this guy not come up in the first 47 episodes?
Because he's come up every episode this year.
It's bizarre.
Yeah.
So, but here's what I love about Mary Mopik. We should all be like Barry. I say that because when he comes up, it's always when everyone else has just said, this is what it is.
Right.
They're lazy. They're going, okay, Errol Flynn. Once I
realized I could have tied it to a penis joke, I would have just let it go.
And that's what everybody did.
I went back to Wendy's and get in line for another 25 minutes to get my soda wrong.
Exactly. But be like Barry, go be curious and look for this stuff. So then once he found that, people started looking into it more. And it's been suggested that the phrase actually originated with someone else with the last name Flynn, spelled exactly the same. His name was Edward J. Flynn, a.k.a. Boss Flynn. He was a campaign manager for the Democratic Party during FDR's presidency. So he was a very successful campaign manager in New York. And he was so successful at winning elections that his candidates it was like if he was your campaign manager, you were in. And this is real. So in Like Flynn. So I think that what we have here, certainly Errol Flynn is why this got so popular.
Right.
But it wasn't originated there. It was originated by this previous guy, this campaign manager that said, hey, you're in with Flynn, in Like Flynn. If we're with Flynn, you're in. Then the Errol Flynn stuff came up. So it took the wordplay from the expression that was already there and then blew up. So there you have it.
Right.
Mary Mopik and Michael Quinion.
That is, I don't want to say Batman and Robin. That's almost like a Batman and Superman.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's just bizarre. In a way, it's bizarre that he keeps coming up. But it's not because, and I wonder too if one of the reasons why he keeps coming up is because we were doing a lot of the really classic ones in the first season especially, and there was so much done on them. We're going a little deeper this season, and I think that's where his specialty is, which is ones that take a little more work, like in Like Flynn. So there you have it. I don't want to use that anymore though, because Errol Flynn seems kind of icky now. You know?
Icky's a very good way to put it. Once you see the word statutory float around, it's like, let's let you go.
Yeah, it was
not a fan.
It puts a real stink on the whole thing. So
we expect an actor to be a degenerate, right? But there are limits too.
But he reveled in it, and I don't think it's just. So I would say, like, I don't know enough about Errol Flynn to say he's actually like a bad person, but I'm gonna say thumbs down on this. In Like Flynn, don't say it. Use Bob's Your Uncle. I like Bob's Your Uncle.
Yeah.
If you have the urge to say in Like Flynn, say Bob's Your Uncle.
Yeah.
You ready for the next one?
I am ready.
All right. The next one is Murphy's Law.
Murphy's Law.
I'm excited for this one because it's used a lot. Like, I use it all the time.
Tremendously. I used it today. I almost might use this daily, or if I don't use it daily, I'm mentally looking at that. Just in my professional life, very risk adverse. I always have to look at Murphy's Law in everything that I do. And just as anyone who spent time with me that listens to this knows that Murphy's Law seems to kind of follow me around also. If something can go wrong, it will, and it'll probably happen to Steve.
What you just said is fascinating because you touched on a couple different ways it's used.
Mm-hmm.
You actually used the word risk and being risk averse, and you said at work you use it. And then you talked about sort of the bad luck. I'm not saying you're like a Jonah, like
no, not that bad, but something's gonna happen, and it's normally gonna be funny or involve me being hit in the genitals.
You're not a Murphy's Law guy. Yours, it's more like a weird thing's gonna happen. Like weirdly, for no reason, a key is gonna break off in a lock, and why did this happen? I don't know.
Yeah,
and then you could say Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
So you would say right now we say if something can go wrong, it will. There are variations on that. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But what's interesting about what you said is that it's not necessarily a negative. I was reading an article, Corinne Pertil in QZ.com. It's called Quartz. It's an online magazine. And she says, hey, most people use it incorrectly. And it's a misunderstood phrase. And I would agree. I think most people say it's almost like this is a disaster. This is a dumpster fire. Any of those things. Oh, gosh, Murphy's Law. It's and there are so many variations on that. There are other ones that I'll get to later, but it wasn't intended to be that way, I don't think. And the way that you started with is more the way I like to look at it now that I've done some research, which is, hey, you gotta, as somebody that's done risk management in my career, we do it all the time. You have to look at every possible thing that can go wrong, because theoretically, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong, and you need to be prepared for it. You need to put in some sort of controls, some sort of something to mitigate it or prevent it. So I like that one, but it gets more used where somebody just goes, Murphy's Law.
Right.
Things are going down. Things are going bad. So looking at where it came from, do you have any ideas, or have you ever thought about it? I'm
going to guess there's a guy named Murphy that had a bad luck streak.
Right. So I always thought about a guy named Murphy. It seems very Irish, right? It just seems like something, some drunk Irish guy, which I could say that because I'm Irish. Yeah.
Hey, I'm a quarter Irish. And you could say, if anything could go wrong, it will, especially when you're drinking.
Right. Most people probably think that. There are some other ones that get used. There's Riley's Law. So again, Irish. Finagle's Law, Spode's Law, Sod's Law. I like the Sod Law one because Sod and Finagle aren't real people. Actually, Sod is an expletive in I think English or British, or I sound stupid, but it's kind of like bloody. We're still a clean podcast because this is America.
Yeah.
But Sod Law is kind of funny because it comes from it initially was said that it was the force in nature which causes it to rain mostly on weekends. Right. So sod being that, but then, and then which makes you get flu when you're on holiday, and which makes the phone ring just as you've gotten into the bath, which this is now turning into an Alanis Morissette song.
Yeah.
Finagle's Law. Now we use the word finagle to mean like trickery, deceive. And the American Dialect Society says that's a finagler is one who stalls until someone else pays the check. Which I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So anyway, these are all variants on Murphy's Law. Still doesn't say where did it come from. It has nothing to do with Ireland, nothing to do with the Irish or anything like that. So the origin of this word is widely believed to come from a guy named Edward A. Murphy Jr. He, along with two other scientists that were in the Air Force, John Paul Stapp and George Nichols, they were at an Air Force base, Edwards Air Force Base in California. They were trying to learn like how much how much sudden deceleration
Mm-hmm.
a person could stand in a crash.
Okay.
So they're using like crash test dummies. So Murphy made these transducers, which are basically like transducers are like where it measures the amount of pressure and then like converts it digitally, so that you can see how much pressure is getting slammed into, right? So the guy John Paul Stapp, who was actually a doctor for the Air Force, he was actually in the car. So this was not, they weren't using crash test dummies because they weren't going hard enough. He had been subjected to like 35 G's in one test, which is a lot. And after the test, they looked to see what the results were. And Murphy saw that the technician had wired in the transducers backwards, and they had not given any readings. So, they crashed a car, they put this guy through hell,
right?
And no readings. So either Stapp or Murphy said, and most people say Murphy, said that something along the lines of like, if there are two or more ways to do something and one results in a catastrophe, then someone will do it that way. Commenting on this transducer thing. So the project engineer, who's George Nichols, the third guy, noted this in his notes. He started collecting these laws, in quotes, that he had been amassing that this guy Murphy said. And this is the one that would like stuck the most was, hey, look, if there's more than one way for something to happen, one's a catastrophe, one's not, the bad thing's going to happen.
Yeah.
It didn't mean bad luck. It was just saying like, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong eventually.
Yeah.
And so this has long been something known to engineers as a warning to say, it's kind of a concept, say that, as we talked about before, if you're working on a project and something can go wrong, it'll go wrong. So let's try to prevent it in the first place.
Yeah. And I think it too kind of gives a good reflection of human nature of, think of all the things you do in a day and all the things that go right.
Yeah.
But you don't come home at the end of the day and think about all the things that went right. You focus on the things that go wrong. So I mean, Murphy's Law also, I think it makes sense. It comes from an engineer doing that. I could see a bunch of, engineers in the 50s with, pocket protectors and short white dress shirts coming up with this.
Exactly.
But also I think it's a little bit of perception too of, you seem to focus on, the news doesn't report all the planes that land. It reports the bad, the bad stuff that happened.
Yeah. So going back to the way you initially spoke about it, where you said, well, I think about this at work because I have to plan for what could go wrong. Yes, that's the correct usage of it. But then you said, I'm doing something and something goes wrong. That's the impact of it later. And you're like, oh, Murphy's Law. So you're sort of acknowledging that thing. It is a actually very useful concept. So anyway, there you go. Edward Murphy. And that's it. Wait, not so fast.
All right. Twist.
Thought I'd check in with Michael Quinion on this one.
Is he still hanging out with Barry Popik?
Well, let's just say not everyone believes that this story is the truth.
Okay.
Namely, Barry Popik.
He's back.
He's back.
And we definitely have a restraining order.
And I didn't plan this. I looked it up and I said, let's see what Quinion says. And swear to God, I start reading through this and he goes, he mentions that not everyone believes this. Barry Popik is part of this American Dialect Society, which is cool. I looked it up. You can get membership to it. They would never let us in, but
especially now.
But I'm really into it. So, I mean, again, I want you to acknowledge over there the fact that this was not planned. These were the two I was going to do.
I believe you.
That Michael Quinion once again cites Barry Popik.
It's Batman and Superman. Superman couldn't figure it out. He called Batman, sort of thing. Yeah. It's impressive. And especially as we're recording this right now outside Barry Popik's house, before we get the restraining order. Yeah.
We need to get a third person that, like, when I say something that I think is, like, pretty amazing, goes, dude, no way. So I feel satisfied. Steve takes it. No, I'm not criticizing you. Steve just takes it in stride. Yeah, man. That's the way it goes. That's pretty amazing. So what does Barry Popik have against this? So I looked into this, and don't worry, I'm still going to blow your mind before the end of the episode.
Okay, good.
Trust me, I'm not done with the twists and turns here. I found a post on linguist.org. It's a listserv. I don't know what a listserv is.
I think a listserv was like early internet where it's just you could put lists of things. I don't mean that sounds a real smart ass the way I say it, but it's the truth. It was just like I remember those things you could get up
like
there.
Like a list of hyperlinks that...
or a list of just things.
Okay, well, all I know is this thing that's still there called listserv /linguist.org, and there's a post from, I think, 2000 or a little after 2000 by a guy named Doug Wilson. It quotes Gerald Cohen, who you may remember his name from the Big Apple. So he and Barry Popik actually collaborated on a book called Comments on Etymology. And so I'm going to just kind of read a little bit from what Gerald Cohen said about Barry's thoughts here. So he said, Barry's research on the topic indicates that the search for the original Edward Murphy, which is the guy we just talked about, as the formulator of Murphy's Law, is a search for the will-o'-the-wisp. So what he's saying is these stories have cropped up now about this guy. It makes sense. It seems his name is Murphy.
Right.
But there are some things that bothered not just Mr. Popik, but other folks as well, which is that, so this guy, John Paul Stapp, who was a real guy, he did work with Edward Murphy, and he's the one that everyone says popularized this. There's no mention of Murphy's Law in his 1960 Book of Reminiscences. So that's a red flag, right?
Yeah.
And there's also no mention of Murphy's Law in any reminiscences of Albert Boyd, who was the commander of Edwards Air Force Base, where Edward Murphy was employed. So none of these guys mention anything about it. Murphy's Law was very popularly used. You would think it'd come up, and so neither in an article on June 25th, 1954, about John Paul Stapp, they didn't talk about it. Meanwhile, in 1962, in the 1962 book, We 7, by 7 U.S. astronauts, they, on page 161 of this book, they say that Murphy was a fictitious character in U.S. Navy cartoons. And it was like a training tool, and they attributed the expression Murphy's Law to the bumbling fictitious character, right? So it's kind of like this knucklehead character that the Air Force had. They're saying, no, Murphy's Law was this guy Murphy is in the Air Force. And so if Edward Murphy really did, well, first of all, exist and work at Edwards Air Force Base, which I'm pretty sure he did. But if he contributed to this, you would think he'd have some recognition among the astronauts. But they don't have any awareness of him. They say it's some other dude completely. And the way that it concludes is that Barry Popik ends up saying, hey, I've tried very hard to verify this and just can't do it. There's nothing, none of the people around this have ever acknowledged it. It's other people and a third party is telling the story of this. And beyond that, the expression itself wasn't put into print until 1952. Now, this is about 3 years after they had done these tests, so maybe there's a connection. But Anne Rowe had a book called The Making of a Scientist, and here's her quote. She said, there were a number of particularly delightful incidents. There is, for example, the physicist who introduced me to one of my favorite laws, which he described as Murphy's Law, or the fourth law of thermodynamics, which states, if anything can go wrong, it will. And Anne Rowe had no connection to this guy, to Edward Murphy. So again, it just seems like maybe it's not him. So I decided to reach out to Barry Popik today, and I asked him.
Really?
I did. Yep. Oh yes, did I get you?
You did. Now
that was. I got your.
There's some reaction.
Okay, good. I really do look for those moments where I can get you to be excited. I did. I reached out to Mr. Popik and I asked him. Well, first I sounded like a moron because I said, I texted him this afternoon because my mind was blown when I was kind of doing my last minute research on this.
You texted him?
Oh yeah, we text. No, I didn't text him. Okay. I didn't mean that.
I went onto
my personal Twitter. I was going to slip into his DMs, but I think he has it set where you can't message him, at least for me. Yeah. I don't know if you have to be friends, but I followed him and then I just added him. As I would say, you at somebody.
Yeah.
And I asked him, and at first I sounded like an idiot because I said, Mr. Popik, something to the effect of Mr. Popik, I was wondering if you had any further research or on Alfred Murphy and whether he was in fact the the source of Murphy's Law. I said the last thing I could find online, it seemed inconclusive because these notes were from like 2000.
Right.
And he actually, and then I said the name wrong. So then I was like, man, I get one shot to like try to talk to Mary Mopik and I get the name wrong. And so I said, oops, I meant to say Edward.
Good.
So first he just liked it and then moved on. And I thought he moved on. I was like, oh, well, at least he acknowledged it. But then right before we started recording, I got an answer.
Nice.
All right, let me read this. But I knew I was going to get you with this.
You did. You found something good on Twitter.
I have a good personality for Twitter.
You do. See, I was right.
So he said in replying to me, which I'm not going to lie, I'm a little starstruck because it's like if you could get Samuel Pepys to text you, not text you back. I'm old. Everything is just,
it's okay.
It's the Twitter, it's the texting. He said, I looked at it 20 years ago. The latest info from the American Dialect Society listserv is summarized here. And he sends me a link. He says, there are forms of, quote, anything that can go wrong will, sayings from the 1800s. So this is one where it's built into our DNA to think this way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go into all the different ones because we're kind of going a little bit long on this and it might get boring, but all the way back to 1877, there was a version of this law. There's a guy named Alfred Holt. And this is from an 1877 meeting of an engineering society. So engineers are the people that have to think this way.
Right.
They're building stuff. They have to know what's going to go wrong.
Right.
You're working on a car or a building, right? If you're the a-hole or you're the moron that doesn't think of, oh, we can't use this because it's going to crumble after 3 years, right?
Exactly.
So anyway, I don't know why I'm getting so fired up. I think it's because he sent me this link. Right. It says, it is, and this is the quote from Alfred Holt. He says, quote, it is found that anything that can go wrong at sea generally does go wrong sooner or later. So it is not to be wondered that owners prefer the safe to the scientific. I don't know exactly what that means, but it's a mathematician in 1866. Again, mathematician. He said, and he's talking about some math stuff. I don't know. He says, the first experiment already illustrates a truth of the theory, well confirmed by practice. Whatever can happen will happen if we make trials enough. And this goes on. So, I mean, I got to tell you, I don't think people say this, like that article I cited earlier on the Quartz online magazine. She relates the story of Edward Murphy as like fact. Like this is where it came from. I think it's a little folk etymology going on there maybe. Yeah. And I love, once again, be like Barry. He was like, not so fast.
Yeah.
We're all just going to accept this. And I love that he cares enough to go back and say, look, I want to believe you. I really do. And that's kind of how he comes off on this one. I want this to be, but like, you can't just make it so.
Yeah. And as I've said before, I want to get this as my idiom, his passionate legwork.
Yes.
He doesn't just kind of put the legwork in. He's doing it with feeling, with passion, and getting to the bottom of what the situation is.
Totally agree.
And still finding time to have random guys with beards contact him on Twitter.
I know. I really want to know what he thinks of all this. All this, like,
we'll see.
All this.
We'll see when we hear the knock at the door from the server.
I know.
Saying, quit talking about me.
I'm not gonna go to the well too often. I'm not gonna start just like hitting him up late at night or anything else. I'm leaving it alone. I told him, I said, thank you. That's very informative or something like that. I left it alone.
I'd like to hear also what his take is on Wendy's collapse. I like your idea. It makes sense. It's very logical, but maybe he has some insight into that too.
I wonder if he does. Barry, if you're listening, if you've made it this far, first of all, thank you for being an inspiration. I'm not dangerous, okay? Steve and I, we appreciate you.
And nothing makes you not sound dangerous by calling out.
But listen, if you do know anything about the decline of Wendy's, let us know.
And we'll double check also to make sure he's not a franchise that he's able to spend all his time on Twitter because he's living that Wendy's life, drawing money from that. Murphy's Law. I feel remiss that we wouldn't conclude Murphy's Law without mentioning another movie. I remember for In Like Flynn, I thought of In
Yeah.
Like Flint. For some reason, Murphy's Law, I have a very distinct memory of a 80s Charles Bronson movie called Murphy's Law. And not necessarily because I've ever watched it, but because it has the movie poster or DVD cover or VHS cover is the same cover that is pretty much every 1980s Charles Bronson movie, which is Charles Bronson with a gun. With a gun.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe they reused the same picture, and sure enough, I look up today just to make sure, is there a Murphy's Law of Charles Bronson? There it is. And guess what he's holding? He's holding a gun, as he did in every movie in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So one other thing, just to anytime we can draw in Roadhouse, I'd like to.
Yes.
So Murphy's Law, it was Charles Bronson shooting, so the plot doesn't matter. So his female co-star was an actress by the name of Kathleen Wilhote, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. One of those actresses that you might not know her name, but you would know her face, and you would definitely know her from the movie, a little movie called Roadhouse.
Who was she? Which one was she?
She was the waitress that said, his name is Dalton.
Yeah.
Sang Knock on Wood on stage, and also saw Patrick Swayze's butt cheeks.
His butt cheeks. And she gasped. She went,
she did. As we all did. I know. She basically was all, maybe that's why I feel such an affinity for her, because we all did the same thing.
You knew that Dalton had turned things around when she got the chance to like sing on stage.
Yeah.
Nobody got like murdered with a, bayonet or whatever was going on in the first scene. So
yeah,
she was awesome. Yeah.
And actually in real life, she is a very talented actress and a singer.
That movie is so good. And by the way, I'm sure you know this, but the singer from X,
John Doe.
John Doe is the rat face guy. Oh, I shouldn't call him that, but who I'm talking about. When I say it.
No, he was dressing up like is that mustache.
Yeah. And there were a lot of interesting people in that movie.
He looked like somebody Charles Bronson would shoot in one of his 80s movies.
Yeah, for sure. Which I do want to get back to Charles Bronson for a second before we wrap here. I've never seen a Charles Bronson movie. I've never seen what was his big thing?
Shooting people in the 80s.
Yeah. Oh, was he the John Wick of?
No, he's kind of like I'd almost call him like a poor man's like Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, that's
like
what
he just he shot people in the face in the 80s, but not in an exciting John Wick way.
What was his big movie thing? His big franchise.
So his big franchise was Death Wish. Which was mid 70s and kind of like a more violent, I'd say lower class Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
And that Dirty Harry was a cop who didn't play by the rules.
Well, Dirty Harry is because Clint Eastwood is cool.
Yeah.
And he's Clint Eastwood. I feel like, and I'm sorry if anybody listening is a big Charles Bronson fan, but to me, Charles Bronson doesn't seem cool. He just seems like the least charismatic person ever. Like you just look at him, he just kind of like looks like he rolled out of bed and he's like, I guess I'll shoot someone today.
So
I don't know.
He has a couple films that I actually really highly value. Okay. And they're not 80s films. He actually is in probably my second favorite Western, Once Upon a Time in the West.
I know you like that one, yeah.
And he is...
What's your favorite, The Magnificent Seven?
The Searchers.
The Searchers.
John Wayne.
Okay, sorry.
Which is a beautiful movie if you ever get a chance to watch it. Just the cinematography.
Okay. I may have seen it, but it's been a while.
So, Once Upon a Time in the West, he is basically the Clint Eastwood man with no name role. And Charles Bronson is not someone I would think of as having a range of acting skill, but he does what he does in that movie pretty well. He also has another movie that I enjoy tremendously. Try to watch about once a year, called The Mechanic. It's been remade in the last few years with the Transporter. Jason Statham.
That's why I've heard of it.
But the 70s version is kind of a good 70s slow burn movie about an assassin who ends up training his replacement and some of the things that go on with that. And it's got a good 70s kind of slower pace to it.
Is he the lead? Well, I guess he is because he's Charles Bronson.
But he actually...
So I feel like he'd be better as like an older kind of sidekick in a movie. But
I could
what
see
do I
that.
know? I've never seen a Charles Bronson movie. So I'm talking out of my...
So anyway, we've kind of
we've veered way off with this, but thank you.
I think I'm going to tie it all back together.
Are you going to? All right, tie it back, baby. That's what you do.
Let's see.
That's why
so
you get paid the big bucks.
in the same way that I feel like Charles Bronson in the '80s kind of got like his thing, and rested on his laurels. I think Wendy's has done the same, and maybe that's the problem. That they essentially are the Charles Bronson cover. Like, we know what, hey, what are you going to do on this movie poster, Charles Bronson? You're going to hold a gun?
Yeah.
Wendy's has done the same thing, and I think they could all take they should all take an example. Not really Charles Bronson, because he's been dead a while, but Barry Popik. Barry Popik doesn't rest on his laurels. Maybe
no, he's the opposite of that.
Passionate legwork. He's not taking no for an answer. I think what we should take away from this is Barry Popik needs to take over Wendy's.
Oh, you just blew my mind.
And we'll just leave it at that.
All right, Barry, we need you. Wendy's needs you.
Yeah, and we're outside your house right now. This is Steve from Origin of Species. Thank you very much for listening to our show. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a positive review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Also, next week, we celebrate the 1-year anniversary of our least listened to episode, our ode to the movie Roadhouse, starring Patrick Swayze, and why it should be considered the official movie of Thanksgiving. To celebrate our great failure, we decided to record a sequel episode with lots of special guests. Come back next week for our annual Thanksgiving episode to hear why we think Roadhouse should be the official movie for Thanksgiving. Thank you again for listening.
I have a good personality for Twitter.